My name is Lucas Harris, and at 32, I've spent most of my life just trying to stay afloat. I never imagined I'd be where I am today, working long hours at a coffee shop, serving lattes to people who barely notice me. My dreams of owning a business, of being my own boss, always seemed so far out of reach. The bills pile up faster than I can pay them, and with student loans haunting me like a shadow, there are days when I wonder if I'll ever break free. I've spent the last few years feeling stuck, watching everyone else around me seem to have their lives figured out. But that all changed one rainy afternoon. It was a Thursday when I got the call that would turn my life upside down. I had just finished my shift and was sitting in my small, cluttered apartment, sipping on a cup of the cheapest coffee I could find. The phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional. Robert Turner, my grandfather's lawyer. The name alone sent a jolt of surprise through me. My grandfather, Robert Harris, and I hadn't spoken in years. There was a lot of bad blood between us, mostly due to the rift caused by my father's gambling problems. My dad's addiction had torn our family apart, and when I chose to side with him, I lost any connection I had with my grandfather. So when Robert Turner mentioned my grandfather's name, I assumed it was just another distant family matter that didn't concern me. But then the lawyer's next words took me by surprise. "I'm calling about your grandfather's estate. He passed away last week, and according to his will, you've inherited his property." I blinked, certain I hadn't heard him right. My grandfather had left me something? After all these years, after all the silence between us, I tried to gather my thoughts, but my mind raced. "Property?" I repeated, trying to make sense of the situation. "Yes," Robert said. "It's a 4-story office building in downtown Bayview." I felt my heart skip a beat. Bayview? That was one of the most sought-after locations in the city. The kind of place people would kill to have a business. I couldn't wrap my head around it. "What kind of office building?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's well-maintained, and it's been in your grandfather's care for decades. But there's more you'll need to know about the situation," Robert added, his tone now serious. I leaned back against the chair, still trying to process what was happening. This was the kind of opportunity I'd only ever dreamed about. I hadn't known my grandfather well, and the distance between us was painful, but this could change everything. I had never expected to inherit something like this. A building, a legacy. It felt like fate had finally thrown me a lifeline, something to grab hold of and pull myself out of the financial hole I'd been in for so long. "Mr. Harris, are you still there?" Robert's voice broke through my thoughts. "Yeah," I said, feeling a bit shaky. "Sorry, I'm in shock. What do I need to do?" "Well, there are a few things I'll need to go over with you. I'll explain everything in detail when you come to the office," he replied. As I hung up the phone, I sat there for a moment, staring at the same walls that had felt so confining just minutes before. This was it, my chance to turn things around. But little did I know, what awaited me wasn't just an inheritance. It was the beginning of a journey that would change everything I thought I knew about family, generosity, and what it really means to build a life worth living. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of the building, staring up at its towering glass and steel frame. The location was everything I had dreamed of, right in the heart of Bayview, the city's most vibrant district. It was hard to believe that this was now mine. The modern architecture gleamed in the sunlight, and the surrounding streets buzzed with the energy of people rushing to their offices and meetings. Everything about this place screamed success, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I stepped inside, I was greeted by Eleanor Moore, the property manager. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. She extended her hand and offered a tight but friendly smile. I could tell from the way she carried herself that she'd been in the property business for a long time. "Mr. Harris, nice to finally meet you," she said as she led me down the sleek, polished hallway. "I've been managing your grandfather's building for the past few years." I followed her into a small, minimalist office where she motioned for me to sit. The room was full of neatly organized papers, and a large desk dominated the center. Eleanor sat across from me, but her expression had shifted slightly, from polite to something else. Concern, maybe even worry. I should have explained everything to you before, but there's something about this building you need to know, she began, her voice lowering. There's a tenant here, Catherine Bell. She's been renting the top floor office space for over 30 years. I raised an eyebrow. So what's the problem? The thing is, Eleanor hesitated, glancing at the paperwork in front of her. She hasn't paid rent in all that time. I sat up straighter. What do you mean she hasn't paid rent? For 30 years? Eleanor nodded, her eyes not meeting mine. There's no lease agreement, no records of any payments, nothing. She paused before adding, Your grandfather never wanted to discuss it. Every time I asked him about it, he would just say, Catherine stays, and change the subject. Why hasn't she been evicted? I asked, my frustration starting to build. Eleanor's gaze shifted as if unsure how much she should say. Your grandfather was very protective of her. I don't know the full story, but every time I tried to dig deeper, there was always a wall. All I know is that the financials here have been a mess because of her rent situation. It's been eating into the building's income. I felt a surge of anger. A tenant living rent-free for 3 decades? That was millions of dollars in lost revenue. I could already feel the weight of the burden settling on my shoulders. How long has this been going on? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. At least since the early 90s, Eleanor replied. This has been the status quo for as long as I've been involved with the building. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There I was, drowning in debt, trying to figure out how I was going to pay my rent next month, and this woman had been living in a prime office space without paying a dime for 30 years. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. I need to talk to her. This situation has to change. Eleanor's face softened. I understand, but I should warn you. Your grandfather was very protective of her. He made it clear that she was never to be bothered, never to be harassed. It's not a situation you should approach lightly. I don't care, I snapped, my frustration getting the best of me. I've inherited this place, and I can't afford to let someone live here for free. I'll talk to her myself. As I left Eleanor's office and made my way to the top floor, I could feel my blood pressure rising. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this slide. There was no way I could manage this property if people were allowed to take advantage of me like this. But deep down, I couldn't help wondering, why had my grandfather made this arrangement? What was it about Catherine that made him protect her so fiercely? That question gnawed at me as I reached the top of the stairs and stood before the door to Catherine's office. I stood in front of the door, my hand hovering over the brass handle, a mix of anger and confusion swirling in my chest. The building, sleek and professional, had become a symbol of opportunity for me, but standing here now, I felt like an imposter in my own inheritance. The woman on the other side of this door had been living in one of the most valuable office spaces in Bayview for free for 30 years, and I needed answers. I knocked firmly, trying to steady my breathing. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman who, despite her age, exuded an air of quiet elegance. She had silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, sharp green eyes framed by thin glasses, and a simple cardigan draped over her shoulders. She looked every bit the part of someone who had built a life of success, but one that wasn't being paid for. Mr. Harris, I was expecting you, she said, her voice calm and composed, as though she had known this moment was inevitable. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, then crossed the threshold. The office was as stunning as I imagined. High ceilings, wide windows with an almost panoramic view of the city, and walls lined with bookshelves full of leather-bound novels. The furniture was minimal but classy, a few pieces of tasteful art hanging on the walls. It didn't look like the space of a freeloader. It looked like the kind of office someone who had worked hard for years would have earned. But it felt wrong. This was my grandfather's building, and I was about to lose control of it to a woman who hadn't paid rent in 3 decades. I suppose you're here about the rent situation, she said as she gestured to a chair across from her desk. 30 years without paying rent, I blurted out, unable to contain my frustration. How is that even possible? You've been living here for free all this time, and no one thought to do anything about it? Catherine smiled softly, as if my anger didn't faze her. "I understand your frustration, Lucas," she said, her voice steady. "But before you make any final decisions, I'd like you to do something for me." She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. "Go down to the basement storage room and look through your grandfather's old ledgers. Look for my name, Catherine Bell, and when you find it, I think you'll understand the truth." I stood there for a moment, stunned. I was expecting her to offer an excuse, maybe even a feeble justification for her situation, but this was something different, a request, a puzzle she wanted me to solve. "Why would your name be in my grandfather's business records?" I asked, still confused. Catherine's expression softened, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Because, Lucas, I wasn't just a tenant. I was part of the reason your grandfather's business survived. I was the one who saved him when everything seemed lost. And this office, this arrangement was the least I could ask for in return." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog, leaving me with more questions than answers. I didn't know what she meant, but the word "saved him" kept echoing in my mind. Without saying another word, I left the office and made my way down to the basement. The smell of old paper and dust hit me as soon as I entered, and I began sifting through boxes of financial records and ledgers. It took longer than I expected to find what I was looking for, but eventually, there it was, Catherine Bell. A loan from her to my grandfather in 1992 for $400,000, interest-free. No repayment terms, just the promise that she would be allowed to stay in the office space for the rest of her life. I sat down on the cold, concrete floor, the weight of the discovery sinking in. My grandfather had been in deep financial trouble, more than I had ever known. And Catherine, this woman who had seemed like nothing more than an entitled tenant, had been the one to save him. I sat in the dimly lit basement, the air thick with dust, as I flipped through the old ledgers. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I had just uncovered. A loan. $400,000, interest-free. My grandfather, in all his business-savvy glory, had taken money from Catherine Bell, and in exchange, she had been allowed to stay in this office for the rest of her life. I had been prepared to confront her about her seemingly unfair living situation, but it changed everything. I felt a sense of betrayal rising in my chest, but it wasn't directed at Catherine. It was directed at myself. How had I not known this? How had I never heard about this arrangement? My grandfather had built his business from the ground up, and here was this woman, this mysterious figure who apparently had been his lifeline when everything was crumbling. But I still didn't understand the full picture. Why would she do this? Why would someone give away such a substantial sum of money without asking for anything in return? The whole thing seemed too surreal to be real. I dug deeper into the records, the weight of what I was reading settling heavily on my shoulders. I found more entries, a series of loans from Catherine to my grandfather, totaling nearly $1 million over the course of a few years in the early 90s. And every single loan had been without interest, without a repayment plan. There were no legal agreements or formal contracts, just a few scribbled notes in the ledger and a trust that ran deeper than anything I could fathom. Then I found a letter tucked behind one of the ledgers. It was written in my grandfather's neat handwriting, dated July 1992. My heart skipped as I read it aloud to myself. "Catherine, without your help, I would have lost everything. You've saved not only my business, but my legacy. In return, I will honor your request to remain in the building, and I will ensure you have a place here for as long as you need." It hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandfather hadn't just let her stay as some kind of favor or act of generosity on his part. No, Catherine hadn't been a mere tenant. She had been the one to rescue him when his business was on the verge of collapse. The money she had loaned him had kept his company afloat, and in exchange, she had only asked for one thing, a place to live. She had asked for nothing more. The arrangement wasn't just about the office space. It was about preserving the future of my grandfather's business and ultimately my family's fortune. I could feel the anger that had been building inside of me start to dissolve. It wasn't just about rent or a business transaction. It was about loyalty, trust, and a deep, unwavering generosity that I hadn't understood until now. I had come into this situation expecting to be the one in control, expecting to right the wrongs I thought were being done to me and my inheritance. But the truth was, the wrongs weren't what I had imagined at all. They were the product of my ignorance. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting too long. I had to go back upstairs, back to Catherine, and face the truth. The truth about my grandfather, the truth about Catherine, and the truth about myself. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew one thing for sure. I had completely misjudged the entire situation. And now, I had a choice to make. How would I honor my grandfather's legacy? How would I move forward, knowing the truth? I walked up the stairs slowly, the weight of the past pressing down on me. I was ready to face Catherine again. Not with anger, but with the understanding I had gained from the records. I needed to hear her side of the story, and I needed to find a way to move forward. Not just with the building, but with my own life. I made my way back to Catherine's office, the files in my hands suddenly feeling much heavier than before. My mind was racing, but this time, instead of anger, there was a growing sense of respect mixed with confusion. The woman who had once seemed like nothing more than a freeloader had, in fact, saved my grandfather's business. She had been the reason I was sitting here in this building at all, yet I still didn't fully understand why she had done it. Why offer such a generous loan with no strings attached? Why choose to help someone she barely knew? I knocked on the door again, this time with a sense of purpose rather than frustration. Catherine opened the door almost immediately, as though she had been expecting me. She gave me a knowing smile, her eyes calm, as if she could see straight through me. "Lucas," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm glad you came back." I hesitated for a moment, still grappling with everything I had just learned. "I'm sorry," I started, struggling to find the right words. "I came here expecting to confront you, to ask you about the rent, but now I don't know what to say." She didn't look surprised. In fact, her serene expression suggested she had already anticipated this shift in my attitude. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat down, unsure of what to expect. The tension I had felt earlier had melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of confusion mixed with gratitude. "I've read the ledgers," I finally said, my voice quieter now. "I know what you did for my grandfather. The loans, the arrangement. I had no idea. I thought you were just living here, taking advantage of everything, but now I see. You were the one who saved him." Catherine nodded slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "Your grandfather was a good man, Lucas. I didn't help him because I expected anything in return. I had the means to offer him the support he needed, and he had the integrity to respect that help without trying to manipulate it. The arrangement was simple. He could keep his business, and I could keep my home. That's all I needed." "But why?" I asked, still struggling to understand. "Why would you give away so much, no strings attached? You didn't even ask for interest. Most people would have seen it as a business deal, but you didn't. Why?" Her eyes softened as she leaned back in her chair, looking out of the window for a moment before answering. "In 1992, when I helped your grandfather, I had everything money could buy, but I had nothing that money couldn't fix. I had been working on Wall Street for years, climbing a ladder, but at the top, I found loneliness. I had sacrificed everything for my career: family, friends, meaningful relationships. When I saw your grandfather's situation, I saw someone who still had integrity, who cared about his employees, about his business, and about doing the right thing. I had the money to help him, but more importantly, I wanted to help him. I wanted to do something that would matter." I sat back, absorbing her words. It was hard to wrap my head around the idea that someone could be so selfless, especially when I had spent most of my life trying to get ahead in a world where money was everything. "And you've been here all these years, just quietly taking care of this building?" I asked, still amazed by how much I had misjudged. She nodded. "Yes. Over the years, I've made small contributions to maintain the building. It's not just about having a roof over my head. This place became my home, and the people who lived here became my family. It wasn't just about keeping your grandfather's legacy alive. It was about creating something meaningful for everyone here, even for you. And now it's time for you to decide what you'll do with it." I was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. I realized something profound. That the building, the loans, the decades of rent-free living, none of it had been about money. It was about relationships, trust, and giving without expecting anything in return. My anger from earlier felt small now, almost childish in comparison to what I had learned. I don't know what to do with this, I said softly, looking down at my hands. But I think I'm starting to understand. I've been so focused on making money, but maybe there's more to all of this than I ever realized. Catherine smiled, a warm, knowing smile. You'll figure it out, Lucas. Just remember that wealth is not always measured in dollars and cents. Sometimes it's measured in the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. I stood up, a newfound clarity settling over me. I had a long road ahead, but I now knew what I needed to do. The building wasn't just an asset to manage, it was a community to nurture. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance my grandfather and Catherine had left me. It had been a few weeks since that conversation with Catherine, and everything in my life felt different. The office building, once just an inheritance, had become something more, a responsibility, a legacy, a community. I had spent the past several days going over the building's finances, meeting with the tenants, and trying to make sense of how I was going to manage it all. It was overwhelming at first, but Catherine's words kept echoing in my mind. Wealth is not always measured in dollars and cents. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. I had spent my life chasing money, thinking that it was the key to success and happiness. But now, with the building in my hands, I saw that it wasn't just about the profits or how much rent I could collect. It was about creating a space where people felt valued, where they could build their own lives, and where I could contribute to something bigger than myself. I decided to start small, reach out to the tenants, introduce myself properly, and see what they needed. The building wasn't just a collection of office spaces. It was a place where lives were being lived, where people worked, where families were supported. I walked into the first office on the second floor, a small graphic design studio run by a young woman named Sarah. She had just started her business a year ago, and I knew the building had been her first real step toward independence. Hi, Sarah, I said, knocking on the door. I'm Lucas Harris. I inherited the building from my grandfather. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. Oh, you're the new owner? She asked, standing up to shake my hand. It's nice to meet you. I didn't realize you'd be taking over. I smiled back, trying to look more confident than I felt. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but I'm here to make sure things run smoothly. I wanted to check in with everyone, see how things are going, if you need anything. Sarah looked at me thoughtfully, then nodded. Well, things have been good, but I've been struggling with the rent. As a small business, it's hard to keep up with payments when business is slow. I nodded, understanding the pressure she must be under. I hear you. I've been going over the building's finances, and I'm planning to make some changes. I don't want anyone here to feel like they're struggling or under pressure. We're a community, and I want to help however I can. Sarah's face softened, and she seemed relieved. That means a lot to me. I've been worried about that, to be honest. I'm trying to grow, but it's tough when the cost of rent feels like such a burden. I completely understand, I said, determined to find a solution. I'll see what we can do to ease that burden. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. As I left Sarah's office, I felt a shift inside me. I had always been focused on the business side of things, the financials, the numbers. But now I was thinking about the people behind those numbers. I didn't want to be the kind of landlord who only cared about profit. I wanted to be someone who was invested in the success of the people here, someone who made the building not just a place to work, but a place to thrive. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was my grandfather's true legacy, not just the building, but the relationships and connections he had nurtured with the tenants. Catherine had made that clear. The building wasn't just a financial asset. It was a place where lives were intertwined, where people had put their trust in my grandfather, and now in me. I had a lot of work ahead of me, but for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose. The building wasn't just a business. It was my chance to make a difference, to carry on my grandfather's work, and to create a legacy of my own. It wasn't about the rent checks or the bottom line. It was about the people who called this place home. As I walked back to my office, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just inheriting a building. I was inheriting a responsibility, a chance to build something meaningful. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to embrace it. A few months had passed since I had taken over the building, and I was starting to feel more at ease with my new role. The financials were slowly getting back on track, and the tenants seemed to be more comfortable with the changes I'd made. I had implemented some new policies, like adjusting rent for those struggling to make payments, and I made sure to personally check in with everyone regularly. There was something satisfying about seeing the building transform from just a place to work into a real community. One afternoon, as I was walking down the hallway, I ran into Mrs. Parker, an elderly tenant who had been renting office space in the building for nearly 2 decades. She had a small law firm, mostly handling estate planning for elderly clients. She had always been one of the quieter tenants, but she was a staple in the building. She greeted me with a warm smile, but there was something different in her eyes today. "Mr. Harris," she called after me, her voice a little more strained than usual. "Could you spare a moment?" I turned around, concerned. "Of course, Mrs. Parker. Is everything okay?" She nodded, though her face looked slightly more tired than usual. "Actually, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Something personal, if you don't mind." "Not at all," I said, leading her to a nearby bench where we could sit down. "What's on your mind?" Mrs. Parker took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "You know, Lucas, when your grandfather was still managing the building, I never once had to worry about repairs or anything. He always made sure things were running smoothly, and if I had a problem, he was quick to take care of it. But now—" She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Lately, I've been worried about the future. I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to keep up with the rent, especially with some of the medical bills piling up. I don't want to be a burden, but I thought you should know." The weight of her words hit me like a punch in the gut. Mrs. Parker had been a loyal tenant for years, and here she was, struggling in silence. It wasn't just the money, it was the toll her health was taking on her. I had heard murmurs around the building that she hadn't been feeling well, but I hadn't realized how serious it was. I sat quietly for a moment, thinking. I couldn't just let her go through this alone. She had been a part of this community for so long, and I wasn't about to let her fall through the cracks. "Mrs. Parker," I began, my voice steady, "I want to help. If you're having trouble with rent, let's work something out. You don't have to worry about that right now. Your health is more important than anything else." She looked up at me, her eyes a little wide with surprise. "But I couldn't possibly ask you to." "You're not asking," I interrupted gently. "I'm offering. The building isn't just about business for me anymore. It's about taking care of the people who live and work here. You've been a part of this community for so long, and I'll be damned if I let you feel like you're not supported. We can adjust the rent, and we'll find a solution together." Her eyes welled up, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she simply nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you, Lucas. You don't know how much this means to me." I smiled, relieved that I could offer some comfort. "It's the least I can do, Mrs. Parker. You've done so much for this place already." As we stood up, I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt before. I had come into this building with no idea what I was doing, but now I was starting to understand the true meaning of being a landlord. It wasn't about maximizing profits or maintaining a pristine image. It was about creating a space where people could thrive, even when life got tough. It was about showing up for the people who showed up for me. And as I walked back to my office, I couldn't help but think about how my grandfather and Catherine had built this place. They hadn't just built a business, they had built a community, one where kindness and support were at the core. I was just starting to realize how deep that legacy ran, and how much work I still had ahead of me to honor it. But for the first time, I felt ready for it. Ready to lead with compassion, to take care of the people who had made this building their home, and to continue what my grandfather and Catherine had started all those years ago. It had been nearly a year since I took over the building, and as I sat at my office one evening, I found myself reflecting on how far things had come. The building had become more than just a collection of tenants paying rent. It had become a community, a place where people weren't just working for a paycheck, but were truly invested in their surroundings. It felt like a family, and I had become the one responsible for keeping it all together. I was looking over some of the recent maintenance requests when Eleanor knocked on my door. Her face was serious, her usual smile replaced with a more concerned expression. "Got a minute?" she asked, stepping inside. "Of course. What's up?" I asked, putting down the papers in front of me. Eleanor took a seat across from me, her hands resting on her lap. "There's something I think you should know," she began. "We've been getting a lot of inquiries from developers about the building. I know you've said you weren't interested in selling, but I thought you should be aware of how serious these offers are getting. One of them is offering nearly $15 million. I leaned back in my chair, my heart skipping a beat. $15 million. That was more money than I had ever dreamed of. For a moment, the number danced in front of my eyes. The thought of what I could do with it, pay off all my debt, travel, start my own business, was so tempting. But then the reality of the building, the community, and everything it meant to me came rushing back. "I'm not selling," I said, my voice firm, though a bit uncertain. "It's not about the money. Not anymore." Eleanor nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "I know you feel that way, but you have to understand, Lucas. This place is worth a lot, and these offers aren't going to stop. Some of the tenants have been asking me about the future, and they're getting nervous. If you don't sell, it's going to be hard to keep it all going. The upkeep, the repairs, it's a lot." I knew she was right. The building required constant care, and managing everything on my own had become a challenge. There were moments when I questioned my ability to keep it running smoothly. But then I thought of the people who had become a part of my life over the past year: Mrs. Parker, Sarah, and even Catherine. I couldn't let it go. Not like this. "I'm not selling," I repeated, this time with more conviction. "We'll figure something out. I'm not going to give up on this building, on the people who depend on it." Eleanor's expression softened. "I'm just worried, Lucas. I don't want you to take on too much. You've done a great job, but you can't carry all this by yourself." I took a deep breath, realizing how much responsibility had fallen on my shoulders. "I know, but I'm not alone anymore. I've learned that. I've got the tenants. I've got you. We're in this together, and I'm going to make sure this building stays a place that people can rely on." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt confident in my decision. The weight of the building didn't feel as heavy anymore, because I had learned to share it, not just with the tenants, but with the people who had helped me get to this point. That night, I stayed up late, going over the building's finances once more, making plans for improvements and repairs. But this time, my approach had changed. I wasn't thinking about the next big sale or the future of the building in terms of profit. I was thinking about the people inside it, about keeping it a safe space, a community, a place where people didn't just live and work, but thrived. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, and I would have to make some tough decisions. But I had made up my mind. I was going to hold on to the building, not for the money, but because it was a part of something bigger, something that I wasn't ready to let go of just yet. In life, true wealth isn't measured by the money you accumulate, but by the relationships you build and the impact you have on others. It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of success and material gains, but remember that the most meaningful things often come from acts of kindness, generosity, and community. Take time to nurture the connections around you, offer support when it's needed, and honor the legacies of those who have helped you along the way. Life's true value lies in how we care for each other and the positive change we create together.